Have you ever wondered how the Scream movie series came to be? Well, you're in for a surprise. Welcome to another video. As always, please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Remember to click the bell symbol and subscribe so you may be notified when I release a new video. Before we get started, please be warned that this is a very gruesome tale. There are details of extreme violence and sexual assault. With that, let's jump right in. The Scream films are based on the life of serial killer Danny Rolling, whose traumatic upbringing turned him into a dangerous monster. Danny Harold Rolling was born in Shreveport, Louisiana on May 26, 1954, to Claudia and James Rolling. Unfortunately for Danny, his father was never interested in having children. He was a Shreveport cop who often mistreated his wife and children. Danny was only 1 year old when his father started mistreating him. He was thrashed because he couldn't crawl correctly. When Danny's younger brother Kevin was born in 1955, the abuse only got worse. James also abused and battered Danny, his mother Claudia, and his brother Kevin for trivial reasons such as breathing in an unpleasant manner. Claudia tried to leave the poisonous marriage, but she kept returning. Danny was described by his school counselors as suffering from an inferiority complex with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control. Danny's violent habits and poor impulse control foreshadowed his deadly wrath later in life. Danny Rolling began playing music at the age of 11 to cope with his abusive father. He performed hymn-like melodies while playing guitar. Danny subsequently began using drugs and alcohol, which exacerbated his already precarious mental state. Danny tried to maintain control by going to church, but struggled to find consistent work. Danny was able to marry and begin what appeared to be a normal life. The cycle of abuse then resumed. After 4 years of marriage, Danny's wife divorced him at the age of 23 after he threatened to murder her. This was back in 1977. Danny converted his grief into a rage and raped a woman who resembled his ex-wife. Later that year, in a car accident, he murdered a woman, which infuriated him even more. Danny Rolling, who stood at 6 feet and 2 inches tall, was a strong and intimidating man. Rolling engaged in a slew of misdeeds and thefts from the late 1970s up through the 1990s. For financial stability, he turned to a string of armed robberies, which landed him in and out of prisons in Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, and Alabama. He was repeatedly released from jail and just as frequently was fired from or quit his jobs. A 24-year-old woman named Julie Grissom, her father, Tom Grissom, and her nephew Sean, aged 8, were all found dead in Shreveport at about the same time that Danny lost his job and came back to exact revenge. It was in May of 1990 when Danny Rolling finally fell apart. Shooting his 58-year-old father twice, he came dangerously close to taking his life. James Rolling was spared more harm, but not before losing an eye and an ear. After committing the burglary, Danny used the stolen documents to assume a new identity. In late July of 1990, he left his hometown of Shreveport and rode a bus to Sarasota, Florida, where he renamed himself Michael Kennedy Jr. Danny wasn't cured even after he ran away to Florida. As a result, his violent tendencies became worse. On August 24, 1990, early in the morning, Danny broke into the homes of Sonia Larson, 17, and Christina Powell, also 17, who were both about to start college at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Powell was sleeping on the couch downstairs. Rolling stood over her for a moment, but didn't wake her up. Instead, he went upstairs to Larson's room, where she was also sleeping, and looked around. He killed Larson by taping her mouth shut so she couldn't scream, and then stabbed her to death with a K-bar knife. She died while trying to get away from him. Rolling then went back downstairs, taped Powell's mouth shut, tied her wrists together behind her back, and threatened her with the knife as he cut her clothes off. Then he raped her and made her lie on the floor with her face down, where he stabbed her 5 times in the back. Rolling then placed the bodies into sexually suggestive positions. Before he left the apartment, he took a shower. Rolling even cut off the girl's nipples and kept one as a cruel reminder of what he did. The next day, on August 25th, Rowling killed 18-year-old Krista Hoyt in a similar manner. He broke into her house, but she wasn't there, so he waited for her in the living room. When Hoyt walked into her apartment at 11 a.m., Rowling surprised her from behind and put her into a chokehold. After he'd overpowered her, he put duct tape over her mouth and tied her wrists together behind her back. He then took her into the bedroom, cut her clothes off, and raped her. As he'd done with Powell, he made her lie on the bed, face down, and stabbed her in the back, tearing her aorta. He then turned her body over and cut her stomach open from her pubic bone to her breastbone. Rowling couldn't find his wallet when he got back to his campsite. He went back to the murder scene because he thought he might have left it there. He cut off Hoyt's head, took her nipples, and put them next to her. He then put her body on the edge of her bed in a sitting position and put her head on a shelf so it was facing her body. He said later that his goal was to make whoever found her even more shocked. Tracy Poles and Manuel Taboada, both 23, were attacked by Rowling on August 27th. While Taboada was sleeping, Rowling killed him. Poles went to Taboada's room down the hall and saw Rowling there. She tried to keep Rowling out by locking herself in her room, but he broke through the door. Rowling then taped her mouth and wrists, cut off her clothes, and raped her. Then he turned her over and stabbed her 3 times in the back. Rowling put Pole's body in a certain position, but he left Taboada's in the same place as it was when he died. These murders all happened within a 2-mile radius of the University of Florida. As a result, the university canceled courses for a week. Students carried baseball bats everywhere they went, and no one walked alone at any time of day or night. Students triple locked their doors and slept in shifts so that someone was always alert. Thousands of students had fled the school by the end of August, and around 700 had never returned due to fear for their lives. There wasn't enough evidence at the crime scenes for Danny Rowling to be arrested. So that no fingerprints would remain on the duct tape, Danny took it off the bodies and threw it away. Danny also used cleaning solutions to scrub the corpses free of any remaining sperm. Authorities were able to piece together the killer's strategy because several of the female victims' bodies were left in sexually provocative poses. The Gainesville Ripper kept robbing houses and gas stations until he was finally apprehended in Ocala following a high-speed pursuit. He was wanted by the police for robbing a Winn-Dixie before they realized that he was the Gainesville Ripper. 2 weeks after the murders, on September 8th, Gainesville police stated that they had a good idea of who was responsible for the murders of Julie Grissom, her father, and her nephew in Shreveport. The body of Grissom was discovered in a suggestive pose, and she too had succumbed to a knife wound. More than 4 months after the murders, in January 1991, police finally made an arrest. The parallels between the murders in Shreveport and Gainesville led detectives to look for DNA from inmates in Shreveport. DNA evidence linked Danny Rowling to the crime scenes in Gainesville. After being accused of being the Gainesville Ripper, Rowling admitted his guilt. Evidence was sufficient for a conviction, and he was put to death in Florida on October 25, 2006. Rowling's final meal included lobster tail with drawn butter, butterfly shrimp with cocktail sauce, baked potato with sour cream and butter, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. The 52-year-old sang a hymn-like song on his deathbed that went on for 5 verses, but ultimately didn't help to change his fate. Before he was put to death, he turned to the guitar music of his youth for comfort. There are now tributes all across the University of Florida campus, such as a mural imploring students to never forget the horrific crimes, and 5 trees were planted in memory of the victims. What better upbringing do you think Danny Rowling could have had? Do you think in Danny Rowling's last moment he became a changed person? Kindly drop your comments in the box. Don't forget to give this video a like. We'll see you at the next one.